Well, thanks for joining me today for today's Coaching Cafe. My name is Nick McEwen-Hall, General Manager here at the Open Door Coaching Group. It's amazing to spend some time with you all today, half an hour of our lunchtime, having a look at how to start the conversation about mental health with a colleague. So let's jump straight in. Before we get going, we'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we're all meeting today and their continuing connection to the land, waters and communities of Australia. We'd also like to pay our respects to them and to their elders past, present and emerging. So fantastic. Today's agenda, we're going to have a look broadly at how to have this conversation with someone in the workplace or elsewhere, not just in the workplace. We can have this conversation the same way everywhere that we go. How to actually start this conversation with someone when you've got a concern about them and their mental health. So it can be a bit of a tricky one, but we're going to explore that. It's not actually that tricky, actually. It's pretty straightforward, but it can feel pretty tricky. So we're going to look at some tips and things and maybe have a bit of a discussion at some point as well. So we're going to have a look at what stops us having this conversation. We're going to have a look at some myths and misunderstandings about mental health, which I think often go a long way to stopping us having this conversation. And I'm going to show you how to actually have that conversation, how to start it up. So these Coaching Cafe sessions are all about a shared learning experience, really. It's about tapping into our knowledge here at Open Door, but also tapping into your knowledge there as participants in the webinar. So please feel free to send through questions, chat in the chat box or the Q&A. I know some of you have worked with me before. You'll know I love a good question. Curlier the better. So feel free to send them through as we go through. Now, if you're an ICF credentialed coach, you'll be able to earn CCEs for this Coaching Cafe. Just email support@opendoorcoaching.com.au after the session, and the amazing Sonia will get all that sorted out for you. So we really do want to have a conversation today. I can just talk, but it's going to be really interesting to hear your experiences here as well. So I can, if you want to, as we go through, please, chat box, Q&A box, or I can take you off mute as well if it's easier to talk about it rather than type it out, which is often the case with mental health stuff. So let's get into it. The first thing I want to give you is a little resource on our blog. You might have seen actually my previous Coaching Cafe a couple of weeks ago about how to recognize the signs of depression or anxiety in the workplace. And this session was all about the common sort of signs and symptoms that you might observe in someone who might be experiencing a mental illness, in particular anxiety or depression. There's a recording of that session on our blog, and that's a really good one to have a look at in combination with today's session, because before we have a conversation with someone, we need to kind of know what we're looking for. We need to sort of know whether or not we need to have that conversation. So that blog post and that video there really gives you some really clear tips about, you know, how to work out if someone is experiencing depression or anxiety. And that's the precursor to this conversation that we're going to talk about today. You know, once we've had a bit of a think about something or someone and we think we need to have the conversation, today's going to focus on how to have it. Okay, so yeah, it can be sometimes a bit tricky to work out if we should have the conversation, you know. And so that webinar there, that blog post, that recording that's on there is a good resource for you to have a look at. So check that out. It's opendoorcoaching.com.au/blog. So to give you some context, I know that some of you on the line will know this well and truly by now. 1 in 5 Australian adults experience a mental illness every year. So 1 in 5 of us experience a mental illness every year. And that's between sort of the ages of 16 and 84. And mental illness is a diagnosed mental illness, you know, or it's a mental illness that exists as an illness. It's more than just, you know, the normal sort of mental health problems that we might have from time to time. You know, if you're going through a rough patch, you know, let's think about COVID, you know, we might be experiencing some anxiety, which is normal, you know, if we've lost our job or we're moving jobs or our job's been shifted or we're adapting to schooling from home or adapting to working from home. You know, as we do that, it can be sometimes a little bit of anxiety making, and that's normal. You know, those sorts of responses to things that happen in our life are normal, and they're not mental illnesses. Mental illness is something that is a bit more serious than the normal kind of swinging of our emotions and the swinging of our feelings around mental health. So 1 in 5 adults experience a mental illness every year. It's a huge percentage, it's 20%. And I really encourage you to maybe have a look around you right now and count something that you can see and then divide it by 5. And that gives you a bit of an idea about what 1 in 5 looks like. Now, importantly, 65% of these people don't receive any professional help whatsoever for their mental illness. So the vast majority of people who do experience mental illness don't receive any help. And this is a bit of a problem because we know that with help, the suffering that someone experiences, or the symptoms or the signs that someone experiences of having a mental illness, can be reduced significantly. And that's only got to be a good thing for the person. So we would like to see this number, this 65% of people, being a lot lower. Yeah, I'd like it to be 0. I'd like everyone who experiences a mental illness to receive some professional help. It's probably a bit simplistic to think that way, but that would be my wish if I could have one. Because really, connecting someone to professional help is a really great thing for them to do, and for us to do as well, particularly in a workplace context. We think about our colleagues and the benefits that good mental health can bring. We want to kind of do that. And a good conversation with someone, when you flag with them that you're concerned, is a great step to getting them connected to professional help. And that's why we're talking about it today. Most of these people, 65%, don't get any help. But a good conversation with someone where we say, hey, I'm a little bit worried about you, I'm a little bit concerned about you, let's have a bit of a chat about it, is a very good thing to do from a mental health first aid kind of perspective to get someone moving towards professional assistance. So feel free to ask questions here, or even if you're learning things that are a bit surprising, share them with us in the chat box or in the Q&A. So what does stop us having this conversation? And I want you to think about this. Have you ever been in a situation where you've been worried about someone, or you've kind of thought, yeah, I think something's not quite right with this person, or I think there's something not quite as it should be. I'm not sure if it's mental health problem related. I'm not sure if it's mental illness. I'm not sure. But I think there's something going on. And you've thought about it. And you kind of thought about, yeah, maybe I should have the conversation, maybe I should talk to them, but for whatever reason, you haven't gone on to actually have that conversation. Has that happened to any of you? Let me know in the chat box. It's certainly happened to me in the past. I'm keen to hear what your experiences about this or around this are, because it's a common experience. People say to us all the time, this happens. I'm not sure how to have the conversation, or I thought that something was going on, but I didn't have the conversation for whatever reason. Now, a lot of people say things like this. I'm not sure if there really is a problem. Like, maybe I've got it wrong. Maybe I've misinterpreted what's going on. There may not actually be a problem, So I won't have that conversation because I don't really know if there's anything going on. Don't really know if there's a problem. Or they might say something like, well, I just don't know how to have that conversation. I don't know how to go about it. I don't know how to open the conversation. I don't know what words I should use. I don't know what words I shouldn't use. I don't know the right time, whatever it might be. Or they might say something like this: I don't want to make things worse for them, and it's kind of like, well, maybe if I actually bring it up, I might make things worse. And I don't want that. I don't want to make things worse for this person if they do have something going on. So maybe I'll take the safer pathway and not have the conversation. If I don't have the conversation, then I can't make things any worse. Yeah. But if I do know them, yeah, it might be harder even still, or it might be easier, who knows. But if I don't want to make things worse for the person, I might stop having the conversation. What about this one? It's really none of my business. Oh yeah, it looks like something's happening, but it's really, I don't want to sort of get in their face about it. I don't want to, intrude on their situation. It's kind of not my business. So I think, maybe somebody else needs to have that conversation, something like that. What about this one? Stigma. You know, there might be a stigmatized view about mental health that stops us from having this conversation. You know, oh, well, you know, if this person does have mental health problems, then it's kind of useless having a chat with them because, you know, depressed people don't listen, or it's that kind of stigmatized view that can sometimes stop us from having this conversation. Yeah, it's kind of a very negative thing, but it does happen. This is a big reason why people don't have this conversation. And fear, you know, being scared, just being anxious maybe about having this conversation, you know, being fearful of what might happen, how it might go, doing it well, you know, maybe even being scared of what they might say, you know, not being able to deal with that, you know, that kind of fear around this conversation. So there's a lot of reasons, I think, these are the ones that people tell me about anyway, that stop us having the conversation. And they're all pretty understandable. You know, I think these are all pretty understandable. I get it. You know, I get that these questions might come up or these thoughts might come up for us, and these things might stop us from having the conversation. Gillian says in the chat that it's easier if you know the person well and have a good rapport with them. Yeah, that's an interesting comment. People certainly say, yes, it's easier for me if I know the person or if I've got good rapport with them. But a lot of people also say, ooh, if it's someone that I really know well or I love or I care for, the stakes are higher. And so they feel like it's more difficult, perhaps. So that one can go kind of either way, but I absolutely acknowledge what you're saying, Gillian, because it's true. You know, if you've got good rapport with someone, then we have that kind of safety net underneath the conversation. You know, rapport sits there like a good safety net for us. Megan says, if you know that an individual's getting professional help, it can be difficult to have the conversation, even if it's affecting their work. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and maybe it's about how we actually have this conversation in that case. Yeah, because if they are getting professional help, that's excellent. You know, maybe we can have a conversation with them that brings more awareness or enables us to learn more about what's going on. Yeah, great comments. So there's some very common myths and misunderstandings around mental health that I also think get in the way of us having these conversations. Here's the big one. If I ask someone about their mental health, I might make it worse. Yeah, I might make it worse. This is not true. So asking someone about their mental health, statistically speaking anyway, in the long term, doesn't increase their risk of increasing or making their mental health worse, their mental illness worse. It doesn't work like that. It works quite the opposite. And we unpack all of this and how this works exactly in the full mental health first aid course that we offer here. But we generally won't make it worse for someone over the long term by asking about someone's mental health. This is generally not true. The other one is that people don't want us interfering in their business. This is a myth as well. Many people with lived experience of mental illness say, oh, I'm quite actually happy when people ask me about it because it shows me that they care and that they understand and that I feel understood. I feel recognised. I feel like someone sees what I'm going through and really cares. So some people don't want us interfering in their business, for sure. But not everybody. A lot of people with mental illnesses and mental health problems, when they're in that sort of negative space of it, they actually really welcome inquiry, they welcome support. And so if we open up a conversation, we're actually giving it. Here's another one that kind of connects in with Megan's comment there, that they're probably already connected to support. So, you know, there's this common idea that, oh, well, you know, mental health, it's pretty common and mental health support's pretty common and, you know, there's a lot of support around. So, oh, this person's probably already connected to support. But we know that 65% of people don't get any professional help. So we can't actually assume that people are connected to support. We should actually, by the stats, assume that they're not, because they're more likely to not be connected than they are likely to be connected. So we can't make this, we can't take this myth into our thinking because it's statistically not right. It has to be perfect, you know. If I'm going to have a conversation with someone, it's got to be perfect. You know, I don't want to stuff it up, basically. And this one, I think, is also a bit of a myth. We want to have a good quality conversation, definitely, We don't want to have a terrible conversation with someone, but I think if we're thinking about this person to this level and we're deciding about whether or not we want to have this conversation or we should have this conversation, I think we probably have enough skills to be able to have a decent quality conversation with the person anyway. So a mental health first aid conversation or a conversation with someone about their mental health, it doesn't have to be perfect. There are things that we can do to increase our skills in this area, like studying mental health first aid, like learning about the different mental illnesses, that kind of stuff. But the conversation doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going to end the session with an example about that. What else? What other common myths and misunderstandings do you think pop up here? I'm going to pause here for a second. Let me know in the chat box, what other sorts of myths or misunderstandings, or what beliefs do you have here about mental health and having a chat with someone about their mental health? You know, what beliefs and attitudes and things do you hold about this topic? Because we can work through it. We can work out if it's a myth or it's a misunderstanding or if it's an accurate thing or not. Yeah, let me know in the chat box. While you're doing that, let me move on to how we're going to go about having the conversation. So the key thing here, I think, particularly in a workplace context, is that the better rapport we have, as Gillian said before, the better rapport we have, the more we do converse with people, the more we do talk about things other than just, you know, the work, the more likely it is that someone will respond positively to actually having this conversation. And the more rapport you've got, the better the quality of that conversation can be. So these conversations that check in with people can make a huge difference, particularly at the moment where we're all kind of working remotely, or a lot of us are anyway. We have some pretty big stresses. We have COVID, we've had bushfires, we've had droughts, you know, we've had all this stuff going on. Little check-ins with people can make a big difference. And when I say this, I really mean around mental health. So it's one thing to say, hey, how you going? You know, how you been? You know, what's been happening? Those sorts of check-in conversations. But I invite you just to change it up a little bit and just go, how's your mental health? How's your mental health going? How's your headspace? You know, how's your mood? Those sorts of questions. And they're a little bit more personal, I suppose. They're a little bit more less work related, I guess, but they are good quality conversational questions to have with people in a work context, because we are all working remotely. We are all working under pressure and in strange times. And we all, in a workplace context, still have an OH&S responsibility that includes our team's mental health, not just their physical health. So asking these questions is a really great one. So actually just sort of saying, hey, how's your mental health? How's your mood? You know, out of 5, where are you at today? Just simple little conversations like that along the way can normalize the conversation about mental health in a really big way. Lots of little chats along the way about mental health definitely makes a big conversation later down the track easier. You know, if you've already been asking about someone's mental health for a while, or you've already been sort of inquiring in a genuine way, when it comes time to have that bigger conversation more often than not is a bit easier, or a lot easier sometimes, because you've had that little bit of conversation before, those little check-in chats. It's rapport, right? The more rapport you've got, the better your conversations can be. The more intense, the more depth you can have in the conversations in a safer way. And we need to look after ourselves as well as each other, as the pressure in the workplace mounts for some people. Now, I'm saying some people here because although this new way of working is quite stressful for a lot of people, there are a lot of people who love this way of working. And if you're in a state that has started to transition back to workplace-based work as opposed to remote-based work, you might have seen this already, that people are sort of saying, well, I don't really want to come back to the office. I don't really want to kind of come back in. I quite like working at home. This suits me a lot better. So there might be some people where we have to have the conversation at this point, and the stressor might be about returning back to the office. So we can't make that sort of assumption that it's the pressure's mounting for everybody. You know, it's mounting for some people, it's mounting for different people in different ways. Now, Gillian says here, I'm thinking it's in regards to the common myths and misunderstandings, that if you ask someone about their mental health, that they won't confide with you in the future. Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility, isn't it? But unlikely, I think. In my experience, again, people with mental illness in that sort of more serious end of the scale absolutely appreciate the inquiry, they appreciate the care and the support. So I think they are probably more likely to confide in you in the future, or at least be open to a conversation. You know, they might not walk up and pop something on the table for you to discuss, but you know, they'll at least be more open to the inquiry or more open to your questions and your care in the future. So conversation is key. When we're thinking about this in the context of mental health first aid is a good quality conversation with a lot of knowledge sitting behind it. That's what it is. And using a particular structure and a particular model to have that conversation. So let's look at how we do it. You'll often notice a behavioural or a physical change in somebody that sparks your thought process about, oh, I think there's something going on and I think I need to have this conversation with someone. And those behaviours or the physical kind of changes can be big, they can be small, they can be over time, they can be rapid, but usually we've noticed something's going on. And it's usually a change. You know, change is the key word here. Something's different to the way it used to be. And again, in line with a lot of your comments around rapport and the more you know someone, because a lot of this stuff starts off by observing a change, the better we know somebody, or the longer that we've known someone, for example, the better we are to see a change that's happened. Yeah, if you just run into somebody, if you just meet someone today and you see them tomorrow and they're a bit different, you don't kind of know if that's normal for them. And I'm using that normal in quotes. You don't really know if that's just how they are or if actually something's really changed. But if you know someone over a long period of time, you get to know their patterns, you get to know how they operate, you get to know how they think, that kind of thing. And so we can see these changes a bit better. You know, perhaps it's not to say that we can't observe the signs of mental health problems when we don't know someone very well. We absolutely can. We absolutely can. And that sort of stuff is what we go through in the mental health first aid. But here's some ways you might start to open up the conversation. You might say things like, I've noticed a change. Yeah, I really care about you, or I care for your well-being, something like that. You might say, I'd like to help. You know, would you like to have a conversation about that? Now, notice here that we're using I statements, yeah? I've noticed a change, as opposed to you're different, you've changed, something that you've done. Thanks, Jodie, we'll see you next time. So we're going to say I've noticed a change, I care about you, I'd like to help. So instead of saying you know, your behaviour's changed, something's different in you, you know, you're behaving differently. We don't want to do it that way because it kind of comes across a little bit like we're finger pointing, a little bit like we're blaming. You know, you've done something, you've changed, something that you're doing is going on. And look, that's probably true. All those things are true, but how we talk about it, how we broach it can be very powerful in how much of a quality conversation we can have. So I've noticed a change, I care about you, something like that. Here's a sentence kind of put together, a sentence opener. I've noticed a few things lately and I thought I'd check in with you about them. Yeah, I thought I'd check in with you. I've noticed a few things and I just thought I'd chat to you about them. Yeah, so often we get stuck at how do I actually open this conversation? And these are the sorts of ways that we can do it. It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? But I think when we think about the myths, the misunderstandings, you know, what stops us having a conversation, some of the stats and stuff, that's where we get a bit stuck. We get a bit sort of tripped up on, yeah, well, how do I do it? How do I do it the best way? How do I do it right? How do I do it safely? We get stuck on all of that. And they're all good things to think about. But what I want you to know is that, you know, it is safe to have these conversations with people about their mental health. It is a good thing. It's a productive thing. It might feel awkward or it might make us feel anxious, but it is a good thing to do. So it's pretty straightforward. I've noticed a few things, thought I'd check in. Or, you know, over the last little while, I've seen some changes and I just thought I'd check in with you about them. Yeah. Or, you know, something like, you know, since we've been working from home, I feel like things might be a bit different for you. And I just wanted to check in with you about that. These sorts of things. So it's always reflected on us. It's an I statement. All right. It's an I statement. I'd love to hear your suggestions as well in the chat box. I'll read them out for the sake of the recording as well. But yeah, let me know how you like to have these conversations. Let me know if you've had the conversation and how it went. Let me hear how you open it up. So these conversations are important. They, from a mental health first aid perspective, you know, when we teach mental health first aid, this is one of the biggest learnings that people have is how to have the conversation, how the conversation works in the interest of the person that we're having it with in a very positive way. And it's quite an empowering program. You know, it's quite an empowering course for people because you learn exactly, you know, what's going on for the person perhaps, what's driving what you're seeing, and how to actually have a very structured conversation that's very respectful, but it keeps them safe and keeps us safe at the same time. In that course, I often say to remember that had beats perfect every time. When it comes to having conversations with people about their mental health, because of those statistics, around 65% of people not getting help, and the risks that sit with someone experiencing a significant mental illness, it is much better to have had a clunky conversation with someone, to have a conversation that didn't quite go as well as you'd like it to. You didn't quite use the right language, maybe, you know, you didn't quite hit the nail on the head. You weren't exactly thrilled with the way that the conversation went. But that conversation is much better than not having one because you wanted it to be perfect. A conversation that's had with somebody about their mental health is much better than a conversation that has never happened, because if it doesn't happen, we can't encourage that person to get assistance or to understand what's going on for them and to offer assistance if we can give it. So had beats perfect every time. When you're reflecting, there's many times that I've had a conversation with someone about their mental health and I thought, oh, you know, come on, Nick, you're a mental health first aider, you're an instructor, you should be able to have this conversation. But it doesn't go as perfectly every time, but we had it and there was a good positive impact. So guys, had conversations be perfect, but not had conversations every single time. So I really encourage you, if you've liked the content from this session, to have a look at these two programs on our website. We've got Leader as Coach. We've got courses coming up actually for Leader as Coach. It's a 2-day program that looks at core coaching skills and tools for the workplace. And of course, Mental Health First Aid. If you haven't done your Mental Health First Aid program and you're working in a people leadership role or you're working with people, you're responsible for people, that is a must-have course. If you're a ICF credentialed coach, it also earns a massive number of continuing coach education hours. So it's definitely worth doing. It's all online. It's all available online, really flexible. So definitely check those two out. They're worth having a look at. I'll hang around here for questions if you've got any, but thank you so much for joining us today at Open Door Coaching for this session, looking at how to have a conversation with someone about their mental health. My name is Nick. I'm the mental health first aid trainer here at Open Door Coaching. It's been great to have you here. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.